www.offthecorner.net. I'm Rallo, and you are watching the Fact Project here on Full Blast Radio with the DJ Tiger. Salute. FACT is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. The goal here on the Fact Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. Now, we are slated to have join us today my good brother Agyei Tyehimba from Harlem Liberation School. I'm sure he will be joining us shortly unless something changed. But either way, on the subject of brother Agyei Tyehimba, he started a GoFundMe for Dhoruba bin Wahad, who was a New York Panther, a political prisoner and a long-distance revolutionary for our people. And he's actually getting a little older now, and he's facing some medical and some health challenges. And so brother Agyei started a GoFundMe to help him pay for some medical expenses. So anyone wanting to donate to the GoFundMe for brother Dhoruba bin Wahad, you can do so by going to the GoFundMe link in the chat. So anyone wanting to do that, you can check out the GoFundMe link in the chat. The link for Harlem Liberation School is also in the chat. You can get more information from brother Agyei Tyehimba on his channel. And you could also follow brother Agyei Tyehimba on the Linktree link that's in the chat as well. For some months now, CMOTAP, which is the Committee to Eliminate Media Offensive to African People, and the Clear the Airways Project, has launched a campaign against Netflix for the animated reboot of Good Times. It's a very reprehensible portrayal of Black people, and they want that removed from Netflix. So the original call was to cancel your Netflix, and a lot of people have done that. The second call was to sign the petition on change.org, and a lot of people did that as well. And the third call was to send an open letter that was written by James McIntosh of CMOTAP. They want you to copy paste the open letter. It's on offthecorner.net. That website again is offthecorner.net for anyone that wants to copy paste the open letter to Netflix. You can copy paste that, put that in the email, or you can copy paste that and put that in the snail mail. You can print it out. We hoping to have brother Agyei join us shortly, but in the meantime, yesterday, October the 6th, was the birthday of the great Neely Fuller Jr. Neely Fuller Jr. turned 95 years old yesterday. Neely Fuller Jr. is the author of The Code. It's the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. I kind of just refer to it as The Code. Definitely required reading for people of African heritage. We are going to start today by basically giving the definition of what is Pan-Africanism. Black nationalism, I define in my book, the Fact Book, subtitle is Lessons and Solutions for African People. I say in my book that Black nationalism is the social, political, and economic cooperation of Black people nationwide. I go further to say the definition of Pan-Africanism is the social, political, and economic cooperation of Black people worldwide. Now, in this book here, 72 Concepts to Liberate the African Mind. Very small volume, but definitely recommended reading. Pan-Africanism is defined as the African-created political ideology of the 20th century, advanced by H. Sylvester Williams, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, Julius Nyerere, Thomas Sankara, Kwame Ture, etc. that teaches that peace, power, and prosperity for African people will come only with the cultural, political, and economic unification of Africa and the African world community. Pan-Africanism is the antithesis of the ancient Aryan project, the cure to learn indifference, and the preventative for racism, white supremacy, and the prerequisite for ending the Ma'afa and restoring Ma'at. Now, all of that may sound confusing, but in my book, I try to make that a little bit more simplistic. If I, forgive me for turning pages here, I'm kind of doing this on the fly. We're waiting for Brother Agyei to join us. Not sure what happened to Brother Agyei, but here we go. Pan-Africanism. Now I'm reading from the fact book. So Pan-Africanism, the expression Pan-Africanism is made up of three parts: Pan, African, and ism. The prefix pan is defined as including or relating to all parts or members. African is defined as a person from Africa, specifically a Black person. The suffix ism is defined as a distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, typically a political ideology. Therefore, the concept of Pan-Africanism is an all-inclusive social, economic, and political ideology for Black people. It is the formation of a union that includes the entire African world community. The goal of Pan-Africanism is to do what furthers the social, political, and economic cause of African people worldwide. I want to give a shout out to Brother C. Allah, who represents the nation of gods and earth. And I want to give a shout out to Serge Tenst in the chat. So salute to them. So it says in 72 Concepts to Liberate the African Mind, edited by Dr. Uhuru Hotep and Taliba Baker Hotep, Pan-Africanism is defined as the African created political ideology in the 20th century, advanced or promoted by A. Sylvester Williams, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, Julius Nyerere, Thomas Sankara, Kwame Ture, etc., that teaches that peace, power, and prosperity for African people will come only with the cultural and economic unification of Africa and the African world community. Again, I'm reading from the fact book. It says the goal of the Honorable Marcus Garvey was to improve the condition of African people around the world. Mr. Garvey knew that in order to change the condition of African people globally, they, African people, needed a measurable degree of unity and self-sufficiency. Pan-Africanism is a global plan of unity and self-sufficiency for African people around the world. Now, in the fact book, I do a whole section on self-sufficiency. And I say that the 6 jewels of self-sufficiency, as taught by the great Dr. Uhuru Hotep, is food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and self-defense. And our Right Honorable Marcus Garvey always taught that we need to have self-sufficient control of our food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and self-defense. And so the idea of Pan-Africanism is to manifest and exemplify those concepts of self-sufficiency that we can do for ourselves and reduce our dependency on the 1/10 or any other people that don't look like us. African-centered, I will say this, during the Civil Rights Movement in America, the integrationists marched and protested to integrate into the society created by the 1/10. Dr. Claude Anderson said, nothing is made stronger by integration. If you integrate water with gasoline, you will make the gasoline weaker. if you integrate cream into coffee, you'll make the coffee weaker. And so Dr. Anderson is basically saying that integration is probably not a good idea for us as a people. And just give me 1 second. I'm like trying to do everything at once here. See if we can get Brother Agyei by phone here. I don't know what happened.
My bad. All right.
No worries. All right, we got a hold of Brother Agyei Tyehimba. He's about to jump on the live right now. So it says now, Dr. Claude Anderson said that integration only makes us weaker. Mad Jack said cultural assimilation. Yeah, salute to Mad Jack. That's true. Cultural assimilation. So again, just to reiterate, Dr. Claude Anderson said nothing is made stronger by integration. If you integrate water with gasoline, you will make the gasoline weaker. If you integrate cream with coffee, you will make the coffee weaker. That reminds me of something that Malcolm X said. He said, too black, too strong. He said, when you mix cream with coffee, if you mix too much cream with the coffee, what would wake you up will eventually put you to sleep because you made it weaker. So it says, black people are the only ethnic group that fought to integrate with the 1/10. No other people of color in America spent so much time trying to force themselves into the society of the 1/10. For example, the Chinese are 1% of the population in America. 1%. Less than half of that 1% have established Chinatowns in every major city. And they are very self-sufficient. So there's 18 Chinatowns in America. Less than 1/2 of 1% of the American population is Chinese. And that less than 1/2 of 1% created Chinatowns. And so if they're constantly telling us that black people are 13, 14% of the population, all we need is less than 1/2 of 1% to have a measurable degree of self-sufficiency from the system. They, meaning the Chinese, are very adamant about owning businesses and supporting other Chinese-owned businesses. The Chinese spend their dollar with other Chinese people for 30 days before they spend it outside of their community with non-Chinese people. I'm going to say that again. The Chinese spend their dollar with other Chinese people for 30 days before they spend it outside of their community with non-Chinese people. These are the sort of concepts that Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism are trying to convey and get across. Many people, you see a lot of fake experts on YouTube and a lot of pseudo-intellectualism on YouTube. Most of those people promoting pseudo-intellectualism do not have solutions. They're just basically trying to claim an alternate identity. I see some in the chat. Claiming an alternate identity is not a solution. Our greatest challenge is the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. If you are not doing your, according to the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, if you are not doing your part to fight the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy, you're basically just trying to get a more comfortable seat in it. Getting a more comfortable seat in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy, will never eliminate the system of oppression. Now we have joining us my good brother, Agyei Tyehimba. Peace and black power, brother Agyei.
Peace, good brother. How you be?
I'm doing well, man. I'm grateful to see you on. I thought maybe you weren't going to join us this morning, but
man, I had a few things going on, but I'm here.
Okay, and such is life, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now you did recently a video where you talked about Pan-Africanism. So for the people that don't know, that might just, be joining us, or, a person might be 15 years old. They never heard the concept of Pan-Africanism, because this is not what's being taught in schools. And many of our people, unfortunately, outsource the education of our children to the European Center Public School. How would you define the concept of Pan-Africanism?
Pan-Africanism is like a political movement, some say ideology, suggesting that we must liberate and unify Africa, and that there are the African descended people around the world constitute a diaspora that should see itself as being part of a team.
Okay, it seems we're having some problems. Brother Agyei Tyehimba is officially frozen. So it seems he's having an issue with his connection. So see if we can make arrangements to get that together. But either way, I was saying that the Chinese will spend their dollar with other Chinese people for 30 days before they spend it with non-Chinese people. That's power, okay? In America, in a capitalist system, your power comes from economics. And without an economic plan of some sort, you will have no power. So you can claim an alternate identity all you want, and even claim that you're not African. That does not empower you in any way. What is your economic agenda if you're claiming you're not African, or that you're not African and that you're American? I don't see where the power comes from. That's just trying to claim an alternate identity. Looks to many of us like self-hate. It says, so the Chinese spend their dollar with other Chinese people for 30 days before they spend it outside of their community with non-Chinese people. The Chinese never marched and protested to integrate with the 1/10. The Chinese are not concerned about being accepted by any other group. I think that's key. The Chinese are not interested in being accepted by any other group. Chinese, don't care what's going on around them. They are, however, extremely focused on group economics among Chinese people. They are not interested in the 1/10. Now, this is not an attack on Chinese people. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and I think what they're doing, is basically a model for what we should be doing as people of African heritage, because they generate power in the capitalist system. Without an economic agenda, you have no power. So I'm not sure where people are going when they promote certain kinds of pseudo-intellectualism, but it doesn't generate any real power. It says Black people, on the other hand, are too interested in the 1/10. And if you know the teachings of the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, you know who the 1/10 are. Black people are interested in their schools or in their educational system, their religious institutions, their television programs, their designer handbags, their name brand clothes, etc. Noted psychologist Dr. Jerome E. Fox says people of African heritage in America are addicted to white American culture and white American values. If we continue to follow and imitate the 1/10, we are doomed. People with no sense of who they are or their culture are like a ship lost at sea, floating aimlessly. Now, the great brother Agyei Tyehimba is back. We're experiencing a little challenges, so we appreciate everybody for being with us. But brother Agyei, start over again if you would. How would you define Pan-Africanism for someone that might be 15 years old, or someone that just came to the planet for the first time and they're just hearing this idea of Pan-Africanism? How would you explain that?
Pan-Africanism is a movement based on this idea that Africa is central to the lives of African people. That African people are not just people born or from the continent immediately. These are people that were dispersed all over the world, what we would call the diaspora. There's an African diaspora, that those people are connected in many ways by language or linguistic similarities. They're connected by dance or dance similarities. They're connected by historical enemies and things of that nature, and that they should see themselves as a family rather than a disconnected kind of separate set of people with no connection. Also, there are people who say that we should return to Africa either physically or through our culture, the way we see the world, the way we look at education, the way we raise our children, things of this nature. And I should say, Pan Africanism is not new. The social media, like it does with everything, people find something. It's like my great grandfather had a football, right? And he left it in the attic of the home. So that my father used to play with the football, his son. And then my father left it in the attic of the house. Then one day, I'm maybe 6 or 7, and I come stumbling up to the attic, and I find a football. I said, "Daddy, my football. Look." He's like, "No, that's new to you,
Yeah,
but that goes back to my father." So many times younger people may think that something's new to them, or older people who just found something out may think it's new to them, but actually this goes way back. Pan-Africanism goes back to the 1800s. you know, it's very old. It actually predates this whole idea of integrationism, to be honest.
absolutely,
So yeah,
absolutely.
and there's
Okay,
key figures in it: Marcus Garvey. The key players in Pan-Africanism, ironically, are all Trinidadian. The roots of it. And so I wanted to give a shout out to our Trinidadian peoples. Edward Wilmot Blyden, George Padmore. These are we associated only with Garvey. But we need to know, as great as Garvey was, he stood on the shoulders of people way before him.
yeah, H. Sylvester
So
Williams as well.
H.
Now
Sylvester Williams, yes, sir.
that goes into my next question. You get this idea of Pan Africanism coming out of Trinidad with people like A. Sylvester Williams, George Padmore, and so forth. And then you get the concept of Pan Africanism being promoted by the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey, who was from Jamaica. What is it about the brothers from the Caribbean that they latched onto this concept of Pan Africanism before U.S. Africans did?
Well, I think they were more because they were colonized, not enslaved, and that's a whole show. I can't even get into that. They weren't enslaved; they were colonized. With colonization, they had access, believe it or not, to some of the educational systems. They had travel. Many people had to travel to be able to go to certain universities. Many people's where they were born originally was split up by these artificial borders, and they were shuffled around. So I think that many of our people overseas did more travel and were exposed to more of the world than most of the new Africans or the black folk in the United States. For most of the black folk in the United States, those borders were our parameter. That's what we knew. Whereas, like, look at Garvey. You read, forget where I read this, but he talks about going throughout what we would call Latin America, in different places in South America. He never quite made it to Africa, but he made this kind of tour and he went to these different places. I think Panama was one of them. And he's kind of reflecting on how all the darker people all over the world are oppressed and at the bottom of society. So I think that's one of the reasons. I know Stokely, Kwame Ture told me that one of the reasons that our people back in the day, even when he was young, which was way after the time period we're talking about, were more informed globally, is that they had oppressors, colonial masters that were from different countries. So in other words, if you dealt with a British colonial master, you might be familiar with what was going on in other so-called British colonies, the news, what was going on in other British colonies. And he also said, Kwame Ture, that is, that in his day, it was very popular to use shortwave radios. I don't know if that was the same in this time period, but so that they stayed connected with what was going on globally. I think those are some of the reasons.
Okay, because I have a theory that says that enslavement in the Caribbean, English speaking Caribbean especially, ended before it did here on the mainland of America. And so in the English speaking Caribbean, they saw Black business owners before we knew of any such thing. They saw Black, elected officials and sitting presidents and so forth. And so I feel like they might have had, and this is just a theory, this
Mhm.
idea of empowerment because they saw it before we did. What are your thoughts on it?
I think that's valid. I think also education is something I think about a lot is why did so many, not just political people, but razor sharp intellectuals come out of the Caribbean?
Mm,
You think of it, a lot of people come out the Caribbean that are highly intellectual. Their writing is off the chain, their analysis is off the chain. And I think it's because even though it was a colonial education, some of them got a much better education than the black folk did here. Because here the educational system was very clear. Uh, you're not going to be any more than the carriers of our wood and our water. So you're getting an education specifically, whereas I think in other places it was colonial for sure. But you may have heard the expression speaking the King's English, right? Very formal, but they had a very formal education. Even today, I'm part of a brotherhood circle, and I hear the brother in the UK, and they're very sharp with it, man. And when you ask them why, they say, "Well, we were taught these things." Now they were taught obviously from a Eurocentric point of view, but their education was much of a higher quality as well.
okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. And I noticed when a lot of people from the Caribbean get an opportunity to come to America, they hit the ground running. And so I feel like they see America as the land of opportunity, where U.S. Africans might see America as the land of their enslavement. So I think coming into America, the ideology or the mentality might be a little different. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, um, I it, I think about when I was young and I used to watch the old civil rights movement video, the black and white videos. And I looked at the clothing of the kids and the adults, and I was like, wow, they look poor. They look poor. Right. Now, if you was to do a civil rights so-called documentary today, people wouldn't be looking poor. People would be looking for fly. Right? They'd have the
Right.
latest fashions and cars, but they're poor.
That's right.
So the point was that in these countries, there was no credit, there was no social services. If you didn't work or steal, you didn't eat.
Mm,
Whereas here, you can be completely poor. You can be making under 50, 40, 30,000 dollars a year, which is no money, but you can get a credit card and you can front. You get it? And they
sure.
have these different things, layaway plans. We used to call layaway. They have digital layaway plans. So you can get stuff. You can seem like you're rich. You could be really poor. I think that's one of the differences. These people are coming out of a level of poverty that we could not even imagine. Then they don't have no office they can go to. Like, yo, I just need real quick so I can get on my feet. They like, hey, deal with it. So even the gangs, if you look at the difference between the gangs here in the black community and the gangs there, listen, these gangs here won't want no parts or no gangs in Haiti. I can tell you that. They don't want no parts of that
Right.
because it's just a different standard of living,
Sure.
which a level of desperation for basic material things that creates a level of violence and in some ways ruthlessness that is different.
Now, Brother Agyei Tyehimba, on Harlem Liberation School, you recently did a video entitled Understanding Pan-Africanism. Will you be able to share that video now and share your screen so that we can play it and then maybe we can begin to unpack it? Because you did mention H. Sylvester Williams, George Padmore, Kwame Ture, I believe Jomo Kenyatta was mentioned. I would like
Mm-hmm.
for people to see that, not only just to get the information, to see the video, but just see the kind of work that's being done at Harlem Liberation School with respect to the way that you put your videos together and the way you get information out. I think it's an exception, and we want to continue to send people to Harlem Liberation School right here on YouTube. Harlem Liberation School. Yeah, definitely subscribe to the channel. I definitely like those videos because Harlem Liberation School is actually doing a great service for us as a people. And I think more people need to be aware of it so that we can continue to get this kind of information across to our people. Now, I think we have it now, so you can press play if you're ready.
Pan-Africanism is more than just a political idea. It's a revolutionary movement that has sought to unite African people across the world. From its inception, Pan-Africanism has envisioned a future where African nations and people of African descent are united, free from colonialism, and stand in solidarity against their mutual oppression. But what exactly is Pan-Africanism? Broadly defined, Pan-Africanism is a political and social movement aimed at the unity of all African nations and peoples, both on the African continent and across the African diaspora. It's rooted in the belief that people of African descent, whether living in Africa or abroad, share common experiences of colonization, racial oppression, and exploitation. At its core, Pan Africanism calls for solidarity among African people and a shared commitment to self determination, independence, and development. Over the centuries, various leaders and theorists have shaped the Pan African vision. Today, we'll highlight four key figures who contributed immensely to the growth and evolution of Pan Africanism. First, we have Henry Sylvester Williams. Williams was a Trinidadian lawyer, writer, and activist who is considered one of the founding fathers of the Pan African movement. His work in organizing the first Pan African Conference in 1900 and his advocacy for the rights of African people around the world positioned him as a key figure in the early development of Pan Africanism. George Padmore was a prominent Trinidadian born writer, journalist, and political activist whose work significantly influenced the development of Pan Africanism in the 20th century. His contributions to Pan African ideology are crucial because he played a pivotal role in shaping the intellectual and political framework that guided the movement toward African unity and independence. His book, Pan Africanism or Communism, in 1956, was a groundbreaking text that examined the relationship between the African liberation movements and global political ideologies like communism. He was a leading figure in exposing the brutal realities of European imperialism and colonial exploitation through his writings and public speeches. Padmore worked with many leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, to develop strategies for achieving African independence. His political insights helped shape the anti colonial movements across the continent. W.E.B. Du Bois, an African American scholar and activist, was one of the most influential Pan Africanists in the early 20th century. Du Bois believed that the liberation of Africa from colonial rule was intrinsically linked to the liberation of African descendants across the world. Du Bois played a significant role in organizing the first Pan African Congress in 1919, which brought together activists from around the world to discuss African independence and racial justice. His emphasis on the need for global solidarity between people of African descent became a cornerstone of Pan African ideology. Du Bois directly influenced a number of key African independence leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta. His Pan African Congresses provided an important platform for these future leaders to connect and strategize, while his ideas helped shape their visions of post colonial Africa. Next is Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican born leader whose message of African pride and self reliance resonated globally. Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, and advocated for the return of the African diaspora back to Africa. His Back to Africa movement and the call for Black economic empowerment made him one of the most significant voices in Pan Africanism. Garvey's famous slogan, Africa for Africans, at home and abroad, captured his vision of a united and prosperous African homeland. Garvey believed that Black people could never achieve full freedom and equality in countries where they were marginalized and oppressed. Instead, he argued, they should establish an independent African nation where they could control their own destinies. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of an independent Ghana, was arguably the most ardent African leader advocating for Pan Africanism in the post colonial era. Inspired by both Du Bois and Garvey, Nkrumah saw the liberation of Ghana in 1957 as the first step toward the unification of Africa. He believed that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked up with the total liberation of Africa. Nkrumah was a key player in the creation of the Organization of African Unity, now known as the African Union, which aimed to foster cooperation among African nations. Nkrumah was also a key proponent of the idea of a United States of Africa. So, what are the key beliefs that underpin Pan Africanism? Here are some of its foundational principles. Number one, unity and solidarity. Pan Africanism emphasizes the need for unity among all people of African descent. Whether they live in Africa, the Caribbean, the Americas, or Europe, Africans are seen as one people with a shared destiny. This unity is critical for economic development, political independence, and social progress. Number two, liberation and self determination. One of the core beliefs of Pan Africanism is the right of African people to govern themselves, free from foreign domination. It was a driving force behind the anti colonial movements of the 20th century and continues to inspire calls for African nations to resist neo-colonialism and external influence. Number three, economic independence. Pan Africanism advocates for economic self reliance. It challenges the exploitative practices of colonialism and global capitalism that have historically drained Africa of its resources. The goal is to create sustainable economies led by Africans for Africans. And number four, cultural pride. Pan Africanism celebrates the rich cultural heritage of Africa and the African diaspora. It calls for the rediscovery and promotion of African languages, traditions, and values that were suppressed during colonial rule. In conclusion, then, Pan Africanism remains a powerful force for change in the 21st century. Whether through political activism, economic development, or cultural revival, the dream of a united Africa is alive and well.
Okay, now I would like to unpack that a little bit. I noticed early on the move around Pan Africanism was centered on colonialism and eliminating colonialism. Is it safe to say that that was part of the goal of Pan Africanism?
A very important part of the goal. Now, it's a little funny thing though, Brother Rollo. It's interesting with Pan Africanism. History is sometimes counterintuitive. It doesn't kind of play out the way you would expect based on the factors involved. So even though it's about Africa and liberating Africa and unifying Africa amongst other things, most of the greatest intellectuals that undergird this idea of Pan Africanism don't are people in the United States, if y'all are noticing this, and people in colonies of the white man around the world, right? So that's interesting to note. You would think, well, this didn't come out of Africa itself, right, directly. That's just something I wanted to say, because people may not understand why that's the case, and I think that's because people in other places had a little more mobility in terms of access to education, access to public places where they could meet, places where they could have political discussion in ways that continental Africans did not at that time.
Okay, so you mentioned also W.E.B. Du Bois, and I know that he had to antagonize Marcus Garvey at the time because he was involved with NAACP, and many of us don't really see him as a Pan-Africanist. So when did his Pan-Africanism kick in? Because it didn't really begin from the rip with him, right?
Well, again, he's a good example of things that you wouldn't expect. So, Du Bois is like had a light of white blood and white heritage, very erudite, aristocratic type of guy. Went to some of the best universities. Professor, very young, but he always cared about black people and was saw himself as a scholar activist. Now, his antagonism with Garvey, this is going to sound a little crazy, was natural. I want you to think about during Malcolm's time. How many people during Malcolm's time had antagonism with him that were leaders as well? It happens. It's part of community organizing. You see things differently. You don't like maybe where a person's coming from intellectually or whatever, and y'all are unable to resolve those conflicts, so you'll just have beef with each other. The difference with the boys is that because he lived to be almost 100 years old, he was able to make a lot of critical mistakes that most of us make. But because he lived so long, he came back around to actually say Garvey was right. Dig that.
Yes, he did.
Most people don't live long enough to do that and aren't humble enough to admit that. Some people go to our graves and will never say, I should have listened to that sister. I should have listened to the brother.
Mm.
Right? But he was able to come around and say, no, he's right. He got to count the white man's communism. And he eventually saw, wow, Richard Wright is correct. George Padmore is correct. Ralph Ellison is correct. The white man thinks he can control everything and knows everything, even though he's supposed to be revolutionary. So he disavowed communism, wrote a long letter. He renounced his citizenship. How many of us would renounce our citizenship to the United States of America, family? See, we're talking about that's serious. And moves, where does he live and die? Ghana. I mean, that's something like a movie. So yes, initially he had antagonism with Garvey. Part of that people think is a little bit of jealousy. Part of that is colorism between them both, I should add. You know, he made some very ugly references to Garvey physically. Garvey made some ugly references to him. So some of that is some colorism. Some of that is intellectual disagreement. I think Du Bois was, I think he was skeptical of Garvey. Was a big personality, charismatic, big ideas, big language, and I think Du Bois was skeptical of some of that. He thought he might be um, disingenuous, that he might be selling wolf tickets. So there's a lot to that. But we do need to understand this in terms of the Pan-African Congresses, Du Bois is the person who picked up the mantle from H. Sylvester Williams. He had a conference. He had the first conference, I think like 1900 in Paris. But Du Bois picked up that mantle along with other people. And in fact, the fifth Pan-African Congress that Du Bois kind of spearheaded or called is the one that actually united many of the African leaders who would eventually become the leaders of the African independence movement, because it was at that conference specifically they said, we got to go to war. We got to fight for our independence. We got to go to war and take off the shackles of colonialism. So Du Bois was definitely did some things that were, many would say, underhanded and may have come from maybe some insecurities and some other issues, other places, ideological differences. But we want to give him his credit. Historically, you got to say, well, yeah, he was the one that carried a lot of that mantle, the ideas, those meetings, right? And ultimately, he submitted. That's the key. We don't always get it right, Brother Rollo, right? Sometimes we get it wrong. We think we right. We going full steam, and then later we realize, damn, Pops was right. And he submitted. And not only did he submit and say publicly and write publicly that Garvey was right about many things and he was wrong, but he actually took his life and lived it. He renounced his citizenship. He renounced his membership in the Communist Party and moves to Ghana, Africa, and becomes one of Kwame Toure's biggest advisors. And in fact, Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah, and this is very interesting sort of thing how this works out. He comes to the United States, attends college here, lives in Harlem for a little bit of time, and becomes completely enamored with Marcus Garvey. So Kwame Nkrumah is the beneficiary of both Marcus Garvey and Du Bois, right? And he has a huge building in Ghana. It's like he calls it the black. It's like an office headquarters. As a huge black star. He gets that from Garvey.
Yes.
He also has Du Bois set up nicely The house is still there. It's kind of like a museum. And Du Bois was working on a huge, it was supposed to be a huge encyclopedia of African and so-called African American history, which of course he died before he was able to complete. So to me, it's the story of redemption, man. It's real. We got, we come up. I had beefs with people. People had beefs with me, and you don't even know each other, man. Like, and then you work together. You find out, yo, this dude is all right. So I just think it's with Du Bois, it played out unfortunately very publicly. That's but a whole lot of these people, man, have beefs with each other in the movement. They see things differently and they're unable to reconcile those things. And I just wish they were able to reconcile that before Garvey died. Garvey's reading the newspaper and reads his own obituary in the newspaper, and he's still alive and he has a heart attack.
Yeah. Now, how much of that tension between the two was actually being perpetuated by NAACP, especially early on, because Garvey creates UNIA, NAACP wants members because members have to pay dues. And so they saw Garvey, from my perspective, as a threat because they saw him as taking membership away, potential membership away from NAACP. Now, on that subject, NAACP was not started by people that look like you and I, per se. So how much of the problem with Marcus Garvey was actually being like he was being steered in that direction by the NAACP?
Yes. Well, we at this point, as new Africans in this world, or Africans and Black folk in this world in 2024, we should start with the assumption that anytime there's movement to rescue and redeem our people, our enemy is somehow involved in trying to dissolve it, particularly if the movement is strong and is galvanizing people. So yes, the NAACP starts as the Niagara movement in 1905, roughly, not too many years after Du Bois publishes The Souls of Black Folk. And it started by people like him, Monroe Trotter, who was a radical publisher, journalist, brother, and a bunch of Jews. And we need to say this, and these are so-called white Jews. No offense, but we know Jews and Hebrews are not the same. And yes, there's a lot of speculation, and it's probably valid that in that time, Brother Rollo, just like in the 60s, the Ford Foundation, we know, put mad millions of dollars into the civil rights movement so that they could control it and steer it and make sure it didn't get too radical and militant. Malcolm talked about this. He talks about the big six taking money from the dude downtown. That's what he's talking about, right? And this is where nonprofit and all that comes from with respect to our political movement. The idea was if we can fund the revolution, we can control the revolution. Now Negroes are going to just be talking about, I just want to make sure I can, uh, uh, you know, have this or have that. And their mind is drifted away from liberation or the means they'll use to have liberation change because they don't want to lose their check. All of this goes back to that. So absolutely, brother. Definitely. And in fact, the NAACP didn't have a black president, I think, until the 1960s or
Wow.
70s.
Wow.
And it was founded in 1905. So that tells you right there.
Now here's the
So
thing.
yeah.
Here's the thing I find interesting. Julian Mack was one of those people that founded the NAACP. You refer to as white Jews. Julian Mack, and you can search this if I'm sure you know the history of Marcus Garvey, but Julian Mack was the judge that presided over the Garvey trial when he was convicted of 25-cent mail fraud. Are you familiar with that?
Mm. I'm familiar with Julian Mack, but definitely
Yeah.
familiar with how they set Garvey up with the mail fraud.
Oh, yeah. So if you search the founders, the original founders of NAACP, you will see that name Julian Mack there. And then search who the judge was that presided over the Garvey trial, and you will see that name Julian Mack. So it looked to me like the NAACP was gunning for him and the fix was in.
Well, look, for those of you who don't know, if the white man will put plants in your organization to disrupt the organization, you absolutely should assume that he will use outside agents and other rival organizations to do it. So absolutely, not only did the NAACP have some interest in that, but within Garvey's movement, there were clear, documented people who were, we might call, agents or agent provocateurs. Why are people who are the ship captains buying ships, paying triple what the ship is worth? The ship is in mad need of repair. How did they miss that?
Mm.
Some of these ships weren't able to pull completely out the harbor and come back. So yes, he was set up to look. They were trying to make him look like a fool, to make him look like he had big ideas and couldn't carry them through. And that's definitely the government.
Okay,
I'm
so
actually surprised they didn't try to kill him. They deported him. I'm very surprised.
they,
Honestly,
they wasn't killing our leaders like that then. They didn't come up with that yet.
yeah,
They arrived at that eventually because, you know, Malcolm X
yeah.
got killed, Fred Hampton got killed, you know, any number of other people, Martin Luther King. I think there was a trial
They
in the
did kill him.
1990s. Yeah,
I
they
guess
said
they did kill him, just not physically, because by that time, let's say by 19, he was deported 25, 27, somewhere around there. By that time, you know, you had people like Carlos Cooks that came later. You had different people who were trying to continue the flame of Pan Africanism to Garveyism, but it had kind of died down a lot. And by this time, he's in England, and he's kind of, I would imagine, disillusioned, frustrated, disappointed, and a whole bunch of human stuff, you know. So yeah, in a sense, they did kill him, just not physically.
okay, now the video was Understanding Pan Africanism. We're titling this talk The Importance of Pan Africanism. If you could sum it up, what is the importance of Pan Africanism then and now?
Well, we have a tendency as human beings to really get caught up in our little bubbles, the things that we attach meaning and identity to. So our religion, where we from, Harlem, Brooklyn, da da da. I'm Muslim, I'm Christian. We give a lot of energy into that, and that's fine. We need things that give us our lives meaning. But sometimes in getting in these little bubbles, we forget that there's a much larger bubble called the earth that goes far beyond our very small sort of identity constructs, right? And we forget there's other human beings on this earth, many of whom have a similar lineage or a similar oppressor or a similar experience to us, that are suffering, that could greatly benefit from some of the tools and information and techniques and technology that we have access to, right? And so Pan Africanism, on a very basic level, teaches us to get out your bubble, man. Like do what you do and represent Harlem and Brooklyn and all that. But yo, there's whole countries, brother, that we need to know about. There's whole hemispheres of this world that have our cousins, right? And our lineage, our people there suffering. And we have no connection to them, right? And we have great benefits here. Even though this country, as we know, we got a million critiques of this country, right? As we should. But there are certain benefits, certain access to certain things that put what they call African Americans in a certain privileged position in terms of our access to technology. We got public libraries, we got public schools. You go to places in Africa, public school, you got to be out your mind. No
Mm.
such thing would exist. If you don't have money, if you don't convert to Christianity, don't take on a Christian name and do all these different things, you ain't going to school. That's ridiculous. Public library, you must be out your mind. So, because to he who much is given, much shall be required. Pan Africanism teaches that we have a responsibility to our kith and kin in other parts of the world, not just even in Africa, but other parts of the world: Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Haiti, and we can keep going. Um, it teaches us the importance of diaspora. Jews, took that term, just like the LGBT took the term pride. They took it. You type in pride right now, you see nothing, brother. You see thousands of pictures of rainbow flags. You think that pride has to do with being gay,
Mm.
right? So diaspora Jews took that and they ran with it. But no, they're not the only one. We got a diaspora that's much larger and more expansive than theirs, in fact, because they are a very small population of people on the planet, right? this idea that we got cousins. Black people be growing up, be 20 years old, and they find out, oh shoot, I got a cousin. Some of us find out I got a brother or a sister I didn't know about. So imagine what it's like to be like, yo, I got family in Kenya, or I got people in Nigeria, or I'm owed land. I have land I can claim if I can make the claim that I come or have lineage in Senegal, because there's countries in Africa that are doing that, right? So it's kind of teaching this idea that we may need to revise and reformulate our definition of family. Who's your family? Is it just the people in your home or the people that raised you? We have family globally. And it's also teaching a bit that we need to fight. That it's not just about feeling good and going to cookouts and shit. It's about organizing and making sure our people are free and making sure we're in a better position and our kids have a better chance all over the world. And in fact, we're not the only ones that are doing that. Listen, Europeans have all types of conglomerates and unions. They got a European Union. They have all types of things they do to try to organize to protect their interests. What we're doing is no different. And
Okay,
I think it's
so
important people watch and know that.
yeah, so there is a lot of fake experts on YouTube promoting pseudo intellectualism, and
Lord
they're
have
trying to
mercy.
say that we're not African. What would you say to them, or what would you say to younger people that are being influenced by them? Because I think that's a very dangerous narrative.
Yeah, actually got into a semi argument with someone over that. I think it's a distraction. I think that I think instead of it being either or argument, it should be a both and. So there's people who are saying, "Oh, our lineage doesn't come from Africa. We were the indigenous Americans." Well, that's true. That's true. That's a fact. David Imhotep has proven that beyond the shadow of a doubt that those indigenous people we were taught were red or Native Americans was us. They are the descendants of Africans and Asians, right? Now, that doesn't exclude the fact that we got lineage from Africa. It's both. So it doesn't have to be this thing like, oh no, we're not from Africa. We were indigenous here. Where do you think those indigenous people came from? All evidence, and none of the, and by the way, none of these Negroes got no degrees in archaeology. None of them did an expedition, an excavation, and none of them, most of them ain't even been to Africa, have not read the literature or the scholarship on any of that. But all of the anthropologists, archaeologists, all of that evidence shows beyond question that Africa is the cradle of humanity. So it figures, yeah, people came from Africa and went all over the place. But you got to trace it back there. And the fact that people are so, and I'm not going to say names like Dan Calloway, but the fact that people are so interested in we're not from Africa and we're from here is troubling to me. Um, Malcolm introduced the concept of oppositional logic that when you sound too much like your oppressor, there's a problem, right? So they want they don't want us to identify with Africa because of all the land and the mineral and natural resources, right? For one thing, they know if we did that, it'd be over. So they want to keep us distracted from that. And that's why we got Africana studies and Black studies and African American studies now, because people realize Malcolm was right. We need to reconnect with our history, like every other people's does, right?
Exactly.
Nobody's telling little uh 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 uh, Adam McGillivray that he should be ashamed to be Irish.
Right.
And some of them go back to their native lands and they have big once a year and they have big deals. So we know different, you know. So, but when I hear Black people, and I mean there's people, brother, that will be ready to fight over this question. No, can you prove you're African? I'm like, can you prove that this ain't a dream, Negro? Can you prove that right this isn't a dream? No, you can't. So that's not even the question, right? They get into these fake philosophical arguments. Can you prove you're African? Yeah. We should trace our lineage. Some of us may never find those records because much of that was destroyed. But we do know that if that's the place where the first man and woman were born, right, that we do have a connection there. Of course, people went here, went there. It's different geographic drop off points and this and that. But yes, we all can be traced back there. So I'm definitely against it. But I'm gonna tell you, I'm saddened by that. More than upset, I'm saddened and disappointed by that view because I don't know what those people hope to gain. What do they hope to gain with that?
How much of that narrative is being, pushed and promoted by the hidden hand?
Well, here's the thing. Again, we should always assume that our enemies are at work trying to derail in our movements, especially when they see that they are potentially powerful. But at some point, we got to say, the hell what they doing? Like, yo, if we got our minds right, we're gonna reject that. Like I read about COINTELPRO all the time and try to get seeds out of it to teach our people to avoid these things. And one of the things is when people got the right spirit and character, then they're gonna say, "Thank you for the money, thank you for getting me out of jail 2 months earlier, but I'm not gonna do that." Period. You
Yeah,
know?
there's in the modern day now, you can take a genetic DNA test. So if anybody is any black person thinking they're not African, you can take a genetic DNA test. I took the test, so I have genetic literacy. Trying to convince me that I'm not African is not going to work because I already took the test. All of the archaeologists, anthropologists, paleontologists, geneticists, paleogeneticists, and biologists have all said there's a monogenetic of origin of humanity, and that's Africa. So
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the Dane Calloway and some of these other groups. Why would I accept what the fake expert on YouTube is saying over the people that
Right,
are experts in the field? Like this, they can't give me one
right.
reason why I should accept that over what the experts are saying. So that's why I call it pseudo intellectualism. It is totally
Yeah.
illogical, and I think a lot of that is rooted in self hate.
And it's dangerous not only culturally and kind of psychologically, but in terms of resources, in terms of being able to access resources that we are owed and that some African countries are saying. Like my daughter came back from Mali, and where did she go? I don't know if it's Sierra Leone. Forget where she was. She said that they were saying that if you can prove that some of your mother's lineage came here, that they will offer land. So my daughter was back here, like trying to be like, Mom, let's get some family history together. And I'm not trying to say that that's the reason we do it, but certainly it's a good incentive. If my great grandmother was pulled from a place where she was indigenous and put into a place where she couldn't grow and prosper, yeah, she's her descendants are owed something because they were robbed of what she might have amassed had she been left alone. So yeah, that's wrong on so many levels. And brother, I'm gonna be honest, I think some people are just trying to get paper. Con artistry used to be people had to see you face to face. Now, in the digital age, there's con artists and fraudulent players that are using YouTube and TikTok and all types of things to sell people a false bill of goods so that they can take advantage of people's real desire to learn and to know what's really going on and who am I and who am I connected to. And so yeah, I think that's a lot. I think monetary gain is at the root of what some of these people are doing. And I think some of them are plants by the white man, if I could be honest.
Absolutely, and I think I call them bad actors. And I think a lot of these bad actors are basically just being put there to steer us in and misguide us. And that's what I'm
That's
seeing.
right.
But it's amazing that a lot of people are not seeing that. And I think there's two things that Black people don't understand. We don't understand the seriousness of the moment that we're in right now, and we don't understand propaganda. And so because we don't understand propaganda and because it works, they continue to use it against us. So you get these bogus narratives that say we're not African, and then we're arguing and we're talking about something that doesn't solve a problem or yield a constructive result. And the great Neely Fuller Jr., who turned 95 yesterday, said that the chief principle in the system of racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy, is confusion. If you can confuse a people, They're not going to know which direction to go in. And the best thing you can have when you're at a crossroads, and we're at a crossroads moment, the best thing you can have is clarity. And we don't have clarity because a lot of these people are deliberately muddying up the water.
And speaking of that clarity, this now goes out to our younger population watching this. Don't think because the white man has decriminalized smoking the weed and you can get it now, the dispensary, you can get it freely. You need to question that. I'm beginning to suspect that some of the stuff y'all smoking is dulling your minds.
Mm,
It's dulling you. It's taking away the fight. You like Shaggy on Scooby Doo. You want to eat snacks all day, but you don't want to fight the white man and white supremacy. You don't even want to hear that. You're not even magnetized to such discussions. You're magnetized to foolishness. And I think I really do. I'm starting to wonder. I would love to have our own labs, Brother Rollo, to be able to investigate some of this. Because I'm thinking there's something that's going on here that we're not getting. But there's a dull. There's like a you talking to people like
right, right. The brain is
you
shut
know,
off.
I don't know if you experienced that,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah. So we should and this is not conspiracy theory. I'm saying we should assume if people can take you, cut bellies out of women,
Mm,
cut babies right out the belly, take people from their native land, call them animals, and yet rape them repeatedly. If people can hang people just for looking at their wife, if people, and then cut off their genitalia, keep it in pickle jars, and sell them
mm.
as souvenirs. If they can do that, I put nothing past them.
Yeah,
Being
yeah,
quite honest.
yeah. So, brother Agyei, we're at the end of the hour. We actually went over a little bit. We got a bit of a rough start, but I think we hit a home run again. You knocked it out the park. I want to thank everybody that joined us in the chat. Love for love, J Rock, see Allah. A few other people is chiming in the chat. Brother Agyei, tell us how we can get that book, the new book, Wu Kusu. Talk about the book real quick.
Okay, yeah, well, Kusu. I may have a copy here for.
Bang, here we go. Wu Kusu.
Kusu
What?
is not a big book. It's about 152 pages. It's not meant to be a big book. It's a handbook, something you can take with you and, refer to it all the time. And it's about self-empowerment. It's based on what Brother Malcolm told us. We need to wake up, clean up, and stand up. So the book is broken up into those three principles. Waking up is knowing who you are, why you're here, what your gifts are, how you're here to serve. Cleaning up is identifying the parts of us that get in our own way, that stop us from being the people we were put here to be, that we're capable of being. And stand up is now identifying organizations, community initiatives, voids in the community where you can step in and lend your gifts and your talents and your perspectives to help our people to be liberated. That's essentially what it is, and it's talking about getting over your fear. It's talking about how to handle those tough times. Your parent died. You lost your sibling. Uh, your kid is in trouble. You don't have money. How do you get through those tough times? So it's really taking people through the basic things we struggle with as human beings in this life. And sometimes we get so political, we forget that people deal with mental wellness issues and issues of confidence and, and those type of things. So the book is trying to cover what Malcolm talked about, blended with what Asada said when she said, we can't just fight the system. We got to improve ourselves. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah, okay. And so how do people get the book?
They can go right to Amazon. It's technically sold, available wherever books are sold. So if you go to a mainstream bookstore, you would ask for it. Wukusu by Agyei Tyehimba. But you can also, the easiest way is to get it from Amazon. Type in my name and all the books come up. That's the sixth book. They all come up and you can choose it there. Or if you want to get it signed, like Brother Rollo said, man, I ain't going through the white man's Amazon. I'm going right to the brother.
That's right.
So he dealt with me directly. You can also do that. And
Yes.
you would cash at me. I think it would be like $20, maybe $3 or $4 of shipping and handling because I have to send it back. I have to sign it and get it and send it back to you, whoever you are.
Okay, so
So
what's the email for people to do that?
TRUSELF143
Okay.
and my Cash App handle is actually the same,
Okay.
True Self 143 with the $, but it's spelled TRUSELF 143, and that's at
Okay.
Gmail. It's the email you're looking for.
So people, brother Agyei always says, stop playing. Get this book, TRUSELF143 at gmail.com. I just posted that in the chat for anybody that's interested. Email brother Agyei and get your autographed copy of this book. You're going to want this in your collection. TRUSELF143 at gmail.com. That is in the chat. Definitely hit up brother Agyei and he'll sign that book and get it out to you. Yes. And then there's the previous book on leadership. We have to do a whole show on that book, man.
Gotta get that. Our leadership is looking real raggedy, brother.
Yeah,
And
we
when the
got no
leadership is
leadership.
raggedy, oof, yeah.
We got no leadership now. And I think the last real leader we had was Malcolm X. I think the one that was on the horizon was Fred Hampton, but they stopped him too. And since then, we've had prosperity preachers and mega churches and no real leadership that's leading us to what Brother Shamari calls Black Life, which is LIFE, liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment. On that note, Brother Agyei, I want to thank you for coming back on, and we look forward to speaking to you again in 4 weeks, brother. We're going to talk about that book again, man.
It's always a pleasure and it's always a treasure.
Most definitely. So everybody in the chat, Fact Family, I want to thank everybody for joining us in the chat, and check them out. Send that email, TRUSELF143 at gmail.com, and let's get this book. You know, people download the latest song that's probably going to be whack. So let's get this book if you're downloading stuff, or if you're going to spend money on something, at least spend money on something that's going to, you know, be of some intellectual benefit to you, so that we can teach the children and the generation coming behind us. Brother Agyei, you want to say anything else before we close, brother?
No, sir, I'm done. Thank you for the opportunity to you sharing your platform with me. I am much appreciative. I believe it's with DJ Tiger.
DJ Tiger, big up to DJ Tiger. Yes.
Let me give my brother a little shout out, man. I'm a hip hop
Absolutely.
head. I want to shout out to DJ, the brother,
Yes,
wherever
yes.
he may be, for
Yeah.
allowing space on his platform as well.
Yeah, he's got a campaign called Real DJs Matter. Shout out to DJ Tiger.
Yes, sir.
All right, brother Agyei, thank you once again, and we'll be talking to you again in 4 weeks, all right?
Peace and Black Power, family.
All right, peace, brother.